Today we are making cookie dough brownies. This is a 2-for-1 recipe. You can eat the cookie dough, you could eat the brownie, or you can eat them together. We'll start with the brownies. I'm using a 10 by 14 inch pan, but you can use a 9 by 13 if that's what you have. Just line it with parchment paper. It makes removing the brownies easier. It makes the whole process of taking them in and out easier. We start by melting a cup of butter. And in order to melt it quickly, because we want it to melt and be hot, but not too hot, so that we can do things quickly, we are going to cut our butter into these slabs and lay them as flat as we can on the bottom of our pan. Then we are going to take it over to the stove, and we are going to kind of swirl it, use our spatula to kind of spread the butter around until it's all melted. We want it to be hot enough so that the cocoa powder that we're adding now will bloom in the chocolate and the butter. Cocoa powder is very hard to mix in liquids when they're cold, but in this warm butter it melts in very quickly, as you'll see right here. See how it just stirs right in? It was practically effortless. So now that our cocoa is blended in nicely, we're going to add a sweetener. You could use sugar. I'm using today Sucanat and honey crystals. This is Sucanat. It's just a less processed sugar, and these are honey crystals, which is sugar processed with some honey and then dried. But again, you could use sugar if that's what you've got. I would use a little less if you use sugar. I'm using 2 cups of the Sucanat and honey crystals. And again, we're adding this straight to the butter. It helps cool it down. Now that the cocoa powder is mixed in, we can cool down that butter before we add our eggs later on. This is a pretty easy recipe because it really just is all done in one pan, and it probably takes about as long as it would take to do a boxed recipe for brownies. So we mix in the sugar to help partially dissolve it in the warm butter, and that helps us get that crackly top on our brownies. Next, we're going to add our vanilla extract because chocolate loves vanilla. So we'll add 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. And along with that, I will be adding a pinch of salt. And again, whatever salt you have on hand. A pinch is all it takes because salt enhances all flavors, so it will make the sugar just taste a little sweeter. And we're going to blend that in really well. And now we're going to test to make sure the butter isn't too hot. And now we're going to add our eggs, one at a time, because we don't want to curdle them. We just tested to make sure that the butter wasn't too hot, and it wasn't. So we're adding in, if your butter is still pretty warm, just let it cool down for a few more minutes before you add the eggs. What we're looking for is basically under about 120 degrees or so. And just mix your eggs one at a time and really blend them in there so that the eggs are fully mixed into the batter. We're going to add our flour now. This is ground soft white wheat, so I use whole grain in this recipe because, again, with all that butter and all that cocoa powder, we really don't need the white flour. You don't miss it, so might as well get a little fiber in there. Now we're going to carefully mix it in, because if you mix too quickly, you'll get a cloud of flour. We'll mix until it's all combined, and then we'll add our final ingredient. Now that it's mixed in, we'll add our 1/2 cup of mini chocolate chips. Again, these will actually help give the crackly top on the brownie. If you don't have mini chocolate chips, you can leave them out. But I always have some on hand, so I always use it. Scrape around the sides to make sure you incorporate any last bits of flour that maybe have not mixed in, and then we're going to pour it straight into our parchment lined pan. Now I haven't buttered or anything this parchment. The brownies are buttery enough that they'll come right off the pan, well, right off the parchment. And we're going to spread the parchment all the way to even it out to each of the corners. Get it nice and tucked in there so that we get a nice even layer of brownie. And once we smooth this out, this is going to be ready for our oven, which has already been preset to 350 degrees. They're ready to go. Now we're going to place them in our oven and bake them for about 20 minutes, turning them about halfway through. And now they're going to come out, and you're going to see they have this beautiful crackly layer on top, and they're evenly cooked. Now the brownies are done, and they'll need to cool in the pan for about half an hour. Then we'll take them off the pan using the parchment and let them cool completely. Next, we're going to start working on the edible cookie dough. In this pan, we have our butter. This is about half a cup of butter. And we're going to add to this 3/4 of a cup of sugar. And this is just normal white sugar. And now I stopped buying brown sugar a while ago when it comes to recipes, because really the mixer will do all the work. So instead of incorporating brown and white sugar, we're going to put in 3/4 a cup of white sugar, and then we're going to add about a little less than a tablespoon of molasses, because we want about half of this, not a little less than half a tablespoon, because we want about half of this to be essentially brown sugar. So we're adding about 10 grams or so, or half a tablespoon of molasses, and as the mixer mixes all these ingredients together, it will magically turn into a brown and white sugar mix. We're also going to add half a teaspoon of salt, and half a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then we're going to take this over to our mixer and mix it slowly at first, and as it starts to incorporate, we can increase the speed. You can use butter straight out of the fridge for this. It doesn't have to be softened because the mixer will do the softening for us. So again, starts with the lowest setting first, and then as it mixes, you can increase the speed and let it mix for about 3 to 5 minutes until all the ingredients are incorporated. And it looks like this. It's gotten lighter and fluffier. The butter is softened. The brown sugar and the white sugar are all mixed together. I should say the molasses has made brown sugar and white sugar mixed together. Now we're going to add, instead of eggs, which is what I would normally add in a cookie recipe, I'm going to put in 2 tablespoons of milk to kind of make the recipe a little softer, but without having raw egg in it. And then we'll incorporate that again slowly at first. We don't want splashes of milk, and then increase as it blends in. Now we're scraping again before we add our flour, and as you see here, we are, because I saw a little bit of sugar that hadn't mixed in. Now we're going to add our flour, which is a little less than half of it I made whole wheat. The rest of it I left in white flour, because if I can, I'm going to throw in some whole grain for my kids when they're having sugar. And we're slowly adding it in. little by little to make sure that we don't get clouds of floury smoke. And we're just going to mix it in until there's almost all mixed in. We'll see there might be a little bit left at the very bottom that hasn't quite mixed in, so we're going to scrape it down. And then we'll add our chocolate chips, which is our last ingredient. And as they mix in, the very last bits of flour at the very bottom will mix in as well. And so we're adding half a cup of mini chocolate chips again. I like this recipe because I also use it in my cookie dough ice cream. So you can take it and form little balls or little bits to add to vanilla ice cream to make cookie dough. But in this case, we're going to top our cooled brownies with it. You could also just eat it straight out of here. Keep it in the fridge and eat it when you want. Here's our brownies. They've cooled completely. We're going to use the parchment to put the whole brownie pan back into the container here so that we can easily transfer it to the fridge after we've added our cookie dough. The brownies are cool. They're about room temperature now, which in my warm kitchen was just under 80 degrees. We want it to be under 80 degrees because butter melts at 82 degrees and we don't want melted cookie dough on our brownies. So we're going to add our cookie dough now, and we're just going to kind of spread it out in little pats throughout just to make it easier to spread around. And you see me kind of spreading it all over, scraping every last bit. And this recipe is just enough to just make about an even layer of cookie dough equal to the brownies. So we're going to carefully spread it around. We don't want to destroy that beautiful crackly top because then you're going to have crackly bit of brownie in your cookie dough. But if that's your thing, go for it. Otherwise, just gently spread it around and it will even out and spread over. And just make sure you get it into all the corners. And once it's completely spread out, just smooth it off to make it look nice and even. And then it's going to go into the fridge for a few hours to just set the cookie dough and makes it easier to cut the brownies. Brownies, when they're warm, tend to be really hard to cut evenly because the batter sticks to the knife. Cold brownies are much easier to slice, so we'll put this whole thing into the fridge, let the cookie dough set, and then we will cut it. I let these set overnight so they're nice and cool, and you're going to see that my knife goes right through this very easily without having a bunch of brownie or cookie dough sticking to it. And then you can let them kind of warm up before you serve them by letting them sit at room temperature for a little bit. I like to cut these small since they're sweet. And there they are. Cookie dough brownies.